Hello and welcome to Lesson 6, where we're going to be learning about while loops. So let's get started. First thing we're going to have to do, select our solution, right-click, Add, New Project, Console App.NET Core, and this one's going to be named Lesson 6. We'll select Lesson 6, right-click, set a startup project, and we're going to rename our program file to while loops. We'll rename our class, and now we're ready to delete Hello World line and get started. So while loops are very similar to the if statements that we learned in the last lesson. Here's the syntax for an if, and here I'll do the syntax for a while loop. We use the while keyword, open and close parentheses, and brackets, just like we do for the if. So the only difference is the keyword while. It changes from if to while, but it still has an expression that needs to be evaluated to either true or false, and a block of code that will get executed if the condition evaluates to true. But the difference with the while loop is that at the end of this block of code, it goes back up to this line and it evaluates the condition again. And if it's still true, it goes ahead and executes it, gets down to here, goes back up, reevaluates the while. If it's still true, it keeps going. And only whenever it gets to this while and the condition evaluates to false, does it not execute the block of code because this is false, and it continues on with the program, whatever we write below it. So to illustrate what I mean, let's hard code both of these to true. We'll use the true keyword here, and we'll put another true right here. And I want to have something for this if statement to print, so I'll do a console.writeLine, and this was called a code snippet. And you can do it by typing CW and then hitting tab twice, so that you get this empty console.writeLine method. Now I can put a string in here, and I'm going to say the if is true. I'll go down to the while loop. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to type CW, tab twice, and I'm going to say the while is true. Now I'm ready to execute the program. But before I do, I want to explain what's going to happen. We're going to see the if is true printed out in the console one time at the very top. And then it's going to continue in an infinite loop because we hard-coded this while to true, and it's going to continuously print out the while is true. So as soon as I start this, I'm going to make a selection in the console, because whenever you make a selection on the console, it stops the program from printing out. It's just an easy way for us to see the output of the program. As soon as we deselect, the program is going to continue on in its infinite. So I'll show you what I mean. We'll start it. I'll make a selection really fast because I don't want to overflow our output console. We see at the very top, it says the if is true, and then we printed out all of these whiles. You can see I dragged down here. There, we just got to the end. And if I right click, the program continues on forever. So I'll close that. This isn't actually useful. In fact, it's very bad because it's just a hard-coded loop that continues forever and there's no way to get out of it. So I'll comment this out. You can do that by pressing Control and keeping Control pressed, press K and then C to comment in bulk. And you can uncomment by holding Control, pressing K and then pressing U. So we'll continue down here. Let's do something a little bit more useful with our while loop. I want to run the while loop a given number of times and then exit. So I'm going to make an integer variable. I'm going to call it number of loops, and I'm going to set it equal to 0. Now that we have our integer, I'll make an empty while loop, and in the condition, I can put number of loops less than 10. So while the value of this variable, number of loops, is less than 10, it's going to execute this block of code. So what do we need to do in order to actually exit the loop? Well, we need to increase number of loops so that it's greater than 10. Because if number of loops is greater than 10, this is false, and it's going to break out of the loop and continue on with the program down here. So we can increase our variable by saying number of loops equals itself plus 1. And we do plus 1 because this is one iteration of the loop whenever this block of code runs. And before I iterate number of loops, I'm going to print its value out to the screen. So I'll do a console.writeLine. I'm going to give it a label, number of loops is equal to, and put number of loops right there and concatenate them together. So let's run this and see what we get. We have number of loops equals 0, 1, 2, all the way down until we get to 9. So let's compare this to how we made our while loop. We printed out 0 at the very beginning. So we came into while, number of loops is 0, 0 is less than 10. So we come to this line and we print out number of loops equals 0, and then we increase the value of number of loops by 1. We hit this curly brace and we go back to our while statement and we evaluate this again, except this time number of loops is equal to 1 because we just iterated it down here. But 1 is still less than 10, so we print 1 out, we increase number of loops to 2, and then we loop back and we say, is 2 less than 10? It is, so we display 2, we increase it to 3, and so on until we get down to 9. So number of loops is 9. 9 is less than 10, so we come down, we print 9 out, and then we increase the value of number of loops to 10. We go down here, loop back up to our while, and we say, is 10 less than 10? Well, it's not less than 10 because 10 is equal to 10. So this statement is now false. So we don't print 10 out. As we see, 10 is not printed. The statement was false. We don't execute this block of code, and then we continue on and we end our program. So I'll close the console, and that's how to do a basic loop. And let's think, what if we wanted to display decreasing values? We can change the starting point of our number of loops. Let's have it start at 10, a value of 10, and then we need to change our condition here. And let's just say while it's greater than 0, because we're decreasing the value. We're going to display it the same as we do here, except now we need to make sure that it's decreasing, so we'll change our plus to a minus. And before we run it, let's think about what's going to be printed out. Number of loops equals 10, so we're going to print 10 out. We're going to decrease number of loops to 9, and we're going to go back up to our while. 9 is still greater than 0, so we're going to print 9 out, decrease it to 8. We're going to do that all the way down. Let's say we get to 1. 1 is greater than 0. We're going to print 1 out, and we're going to decrease number of loops by 1, so its value is now 0. We're going to come back up to our while loop, and we're going to say, is 0 greater than 0? That's false. So since this is false, we don't print 0 out because we don't execute this block of code anymore, and we continue on with the program down here. So what's going to be printed out is 10 through 1 because 0 causes us to break out of this. So let's run it and see if we're right. And sure enough, it starts at 10 and goes all the way down to 1. There's one other kind of while loop that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to make an empty one right here. It starts with the keyword do, and then we do curly braces. And at the bottom curly brace is where we put our while keyword, and then our open and close parentheses. And this one is unique, and it needs a semicolon at the end. So it has a similar structure to the while loop. It has a set of parentheses, which you put a true or false value into, and it has a set of curly braces, which contains the code that's going to be executed inside the loop. Except this one is a little different, because you get to execute it once without evaluating this condition. So I'm going to set this while, I'm going to hard code it to false. I'm going to do a console.write. This will still be printed. I'm going to comment out this while loop right here, since we're done with it. Let's run it. And what we're going to see is it prints out the line, this will still be printed. It evaluates this condition to false, so it doesn't come back up and run it again. So it doesn't loop, and it continues on with the program. And we see that that's what happened. It printed it once and then ended the program. But if we set it to true, we're going to get an infinite loop like we did up here with this. So the do while loop, in essence, gives you one execution of the loop for free. It doesn't matter if your condition evaluates to true or false. You're going to execute it once. And that's actually really good for menus. So let's make a menu. And it's going to be more of like a soundboard, kind of like those see and says you might have used whenever you were a kid. So we're going to let the user select 1, 2, or 3. 1 is going to be cows go. And if the user selects 1, then we'll print out moo. If they select 2, we'll say cats go, and we'll print meow. And if they select 3, we'll exit the loop. So let's get started. I want a blank console write line, just to give us a space. I'll make another console write line, and this will be our first option. 1, cows go. I'll make another write line, and I'll say 2, cats go. And here's our exit condition. 3, exit. And now we need to prompt the user for some input. So we're going to have one more write line, and it's going to say, choose an action. And actually, I want this one to be a write. Now we need to take a string from the user. So we'll make a string data type, and we're going to call it user input, and we'll set it equal to console.readline. Now that we have the string from the user, we need to evaluate their input, and we need to give them some feedback. So like I said, whenever they enter 1, we want to print out to the console moo. And we can do that using an if statement. So we'll say if user input, and we're doing an equality comparison. So we're going to do a double equal sign, and we're comparing it to the string 1. And if that's true, we know they entered a 1, and we're going to print back out to them the string moo. And we have another option. So I'll do another if, and we'll say if user input equals 2, I want to print out the string meow. So now we handled when the user inputs a 1, and we handled when the user inputs a 2. Now we need to handle when the user inputted a 3. And you can do that with an if statement. That would let you know when the user entered the 3, but it's not going to break you out of the while loop. In order to break out of the while loop, we're going to have to come down to where we use our while keyword, and we have these open and close parentheses. I'll delete the false. We had hard-coded there before. And here, we're actually going to run into a bit of a problem. So I'm just going to type our variable user input, and you see that it's underlined in red, and we have an error that says the name user input does not exist in the current context. This means that our variable user input is out of scope. So our while loop can't actually see this variable that was declared inside of it. There's actually a special meaning to these curly braces. Whenever you do curly braces like this, any variables that are declared inside of it can only be used in between these two braces. We could use them inside of braces declared inside of the while, that's fine. But if we try to use it outside of these braces, then we're going to get an error similar to this. So the way that we solve this is we come up to the top of our loop before we make our curly braces. We need to declare the variable up here instead of declaring it down in the loop like we have here. So we want string user input semicolon. So this declared the string user input. But now if we look inside of our loop, we get an error that says a local or parameter named user input cannot be declared in this scope because that name is used in an enclosing local scope. And this basically just means we're reusing the same name of a variable. Notice how we have string user input here and string user input here. Since we already declared user input outside of our loop, we don't need to declare user input again inside of our loop. And that's what it's complaining about. So we need to remove the string keyword there. And now our compiler is all happy. But now back in our while loop, we need to finish our comparison. So we want to exit out of the loop whenever the user enters 3. So the way to tell if the user entered a 3 would be to do a double equals and compare it against the string 3. But this isn't going to do what we want. So let's say the user inputs a 3. That's going to be true. So it's going to come up here and repeat. But that's not what we wanted because a 3 means exit. So what we do want is we want to know when the user didn't enter a 3. We can run this and we'll see our soundboard. I'll put in a 1. We'll do 2. Cats go meow. 1 again. And finally we can exit with a 3. And that ended our program. So now you know the basics of while loops, and you also know about do while loop, and we're ready to move on to the task. So we're going to make an empty project for it, add, new project, console app, lesson 6 task. We'll set it as the startup project, and we're going to rename it to while loops task. Rename the class. And at finalparsec.com, we can go to blog, find lesson 6. We'll have the notes for the lesson and the associated task down below it. I'll highlight everything and copy it. Then back in Visual Studio, I'll select everything inside of our while loops task and paste over it. And the task is, make a while loop that prints 10 through 20, and then print a row of stars. Then make a loop that prints all the even numbers from 2 to 20, and then print another divider to the console. And then make a while loop that prints the powers of 2 from 1 all the way to 256. And then I have example output here. We have the 10 through 20, 2 through 20 going by even numbers, and 1 to 256 by powers of 2. And there's bonus points if you research how to use console.write and use it to print the output on a single line, each with spaces between the numbers. So the example output is just the same that we had above, except instead of being in a long column, they're in long rows. So I'll give you some time to do that, and you can come back and look at the solution. And here we have my solution. Yours might actually be right, but a little bit different. Lesson 6 is actually the end of the first series of lessons, and the next thing that's going to be assigned is a project. And I'll go over the project in the following video. Thanks for following along. If you have any questions, you can contact me on the Discord channel or in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.